Boris Johnson's failures in the pandemic are partly the product of the office he holds. For Johnson's critics, this was more than a product of poor luck but rather entirely in keeping with his eccentric personality and absent-minded approach to governance when denied his preferred role as the purveyor of positive news. But the address at number 10 Downing Street used to be a double-sorted job. At least previously, under his predecessor Margaret Thatcher, it might have been a cushy and glamorous job, in the case of military victory over Argentina by continuing to occupy Falklands Island as British territory. But her fortune was quietly down and out while dealing with Chinese over Hong Kong. Why? Well, she might have been skunked by Deng Xiaoping, a man whom Chair Mao Zedong used to liken to a steel maker and, oddly enough, his spittoon, a bowl for spit, the likeness of which was recently marketed on Amazon as a fruit basket.
Some say it was the one single event that secured her re-election in 1983. Winning the Falklands War was indeed key for Margaret Thatcher, not least because it meant she lived up to her nickname, the Iron Lady. The conflict began on the 2nd of April when Argentine forces invaded the Falkland Islands. In the UK, a political crisis followed, but Mrs. Thatcher responded quickly. Within days, she had dispatched 2 aircraft carriers, dozens of warships, and thousands of troops. In the knowledge that these pictures would be broadcast in Argentina, Harrier jump jets and Sea King helicopters were left on the deck of HMS Hermes when they would normally be stored below.
President Joe Biden, then member of Foreign Relations Committee, introduced a resolution in full support of Great Britain hoping for a quick coup de grace in South America.
Senator Joseph Biden, the Democratic senator who is sponsoring a resolution in support of Great Britain.
I believe that my resolution, which clearly calls for us to state whose side we're on, which is the British side, will in fact, I believe, aid the negotiating process, not diminish the chances of negotiation. I think the Argentinians must be disabused of the notion, assuming they harbor it, that the United States is truly neutral in this matter. And so I have no sense that my resolution calling on the United States Congress to go on record in support of the British would be anything other than helpful.
Senator, how do you think it would be helpful? Because conceivably that might topple the Argentinian government. Is that acceptable to you?
No, that is not acceptable in the sense that I wish for that. But the fact of the matter is there's a great deal at stake for the United States and the hemisphere. First of all, and for Canada, I might add, very boldly, the fact of the matter is that if we allow in this hemisphere the settlement of claimants' property disputes by the use of force, we're going to unleash an entire series of actions that none of us want. Secondly, NATO is an alliance upon which we have made a firm and solemn commitment. And it's clear that the Argentinians are the aggressor, it's clear the British are right, and it should be clear to the whole world where the United States stands.
All right, you mentioned hemispheric interests. Let's just stick to American interests at the moment.
Yes.
The OAS has voted that they recognize Argentinian sovereignty. Now, don't you lose something in hemispheric relations with the proposition you've just made?
There is no question that the United States is going to lose no matter what it does. The question is that we are going to lose, in my mind, we lose a great deal more by not standing on principle and not standing with our oldest and closest ally and not standing with the alliance that is most important to the United States of America.
One always hopes for an early conclusion. One's learned throughout this whole Falklands campaign that things tend to take longer than you expect.
When the British ships finally got there, they set up a 200-mile exclusion zone around the islands. The Prime Minister gave permission for a nuclear sub to sink an Argentine cruiser, and 368 people were killed. Within days, though, the Royal Navy had suffered its own tragedy. HMS Sheffield was hit by an Argentine missile. It didn't explode, but it caused enough damage to completely disable and later sink the ship. Battle stepped up towards the end of May when British troops started conducting ground operations. It took them just 3 weeks to reach the capital, and Argentina formally surrendered on the 14th of June. 913 people had lost their lives.
We have ceased to be a nation in retreat.
Victory in the Falklands changed Margaret Thatcher's fortunes. Her popularity went from record lows before the conflict to a landslide election win in 1983. After the war, she dedicated lots of money to rebuilding the Falklands and visited the islands herself to see how her policy was being implemented.
If one looks at it from the viewpoint of the Falkland Islanders, their loyalty is total. Their loyalty to our way of life, their loyalty to everything for which we stand. And time after time they come up and thank Britain what she's done.
She remained popular with many who had served in the armed forces for the rest of her life. As a war leader, one famous former soldier described her as the best person you could have hoped for.
But her job became a thankless one in the case of her stonewalling on handing over Hong Kong back to China. Then the Iron Lady melted away while meeting with the short and stout Deng Xiaoping, in whose presence she felt busted by his relentless words. Disgusted by some 16 times he spit into the spittoon of foot, and her thinly veiled threat fell on deaf ear of a serious consequence China would face if it insisted on the return of Hong Kong as China's sovereign territory. And when Deng returned her favor with a clarion call to take back Hong Kong one way or the other, either by treaty or by force, there's nothing she could have done about it, because the last time Britain faced a lonesome showdown with Chinese army during the Amethyst Incident or Yats Incident in 1949, it capitulated. So she won some and she lost some. Might makes right, and facing a giant country baptized by Korean wars, Great Britain would no longer cease to be a nation in retreat, and retreat it did with China, for Deng and his horribly looking spittoon simply couldn't be trusted.
香港问题的3个条约有效，必须继续遵守。邓小平明确地阐述了中国解决香港问题的基本立场。
主权问题是不能够谈判的。只说中国1997年收回的问题是不能谈判，不管用什么方式。
Is to say, look, there may be a lease, but don't you think it's a matter of self-determination for the people of Hong Kong? And that is where, when you're dealing with China, China said no. Sovereignty, it is vital to us and to our people to recover sovereignty of those islands. It is a matter of pride. You see, we would look at not only the territory, but at the wishes of the people there. China, I'm afraid, looked at the issue of sovereignty as an important one, and because the people were on that land, they must therefore revert to China. So in that sense, one was depressed.
Although having physically fallen twice, possibly not because of the disgusted image of a spittoon tripping her up down the steps of the Great Hall of the People, Mrs. Thatcher was wise enough to shift gear and picking her battle, she found a vainglorious self on the shelf of Kremlin.
Mikhail Gorbachev appears in the 2020 documentary Gorbachev Heaven as frail but spirited, who as he now turns 90 can look back on a life and political career that changed the course of world history.
And President Biden praised him for his commitment to freedom.
When Soviet leader Konstantin Chernenko died aged 73 in 1985, it was the third death of a party general secretary in 3 years. Gorbachev, aged 54, became the new leader.
В час гонки вооружений каждый новый шаг увеличивает опасность и риск для той и другой стороны, для всего человечества.
At this time, Soviet forces were fighting a drawn-out, bloody war in Afghanistan. Gorbachev quickly announced a reduction in troop numbers there. At home, he announced his landmark policies of glasnost and perestroika, openness and restructuring, aiming to relax censorship and reform his country's ailing, centrally planned economy.
We have listened to the wisdom in an old Russian maxim, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. Mr. General Secretary, though my pronunciation may give you difficulty, the maxim is doverai no provei, trust but verify.
Назначение этого...
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
Historians have called this the beginning of the end of the Cold War. Gorbachev arrived in East Berlin in October 1989. There was a rapturous reception. But East German leader Erich Honecker was less pleased to see him. In Germany, they call this moment the kiss of death.
Former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, whose personal defects other than his birthmark on the forehead turned out to be an ideal quality for the West to arrange an insider job of eventually imploding the evil empire, although economically Moscow was in a much better shape than London. But somehow Gorbachev's daily ritual of reading out loud of the West's adoring articles of Glasnost and Perestroika further convinced him of his own greatness. Cold War ended without spilling blood. What Mrs. Thatcher lost in Hong Kong's handover battle with China, she won the war against the East Bloc, which would be in full retreat and disintegrating before long. But still, for some consumers, in Spittoon they trust. A recent news shows you how quickly forgetful people are about recent history. Some folks on Amazon have bought what is billed as 1960s Chinese antique kitchen and table decoration enamel bowl. With the spittoon mistaken for a fruit basket, it is quite emblematic of what the West has been doing in reverse for China to swallow the bill of goods the former rams down the latter's throat for quite a while, in the name of recycling useful material, treat West's daily trash for potential treasure, with China ending up as a giant landfill for Western trash. Maybe the first person in the West to recognize Asian spittoons for what they really are is former President Donald Trump. Likewise, the first person in the East to recognize West's daily trash for what they really are is Chinese President Xi Jinping. The mutual epiphany subsequently led two sides to talk at cross purposes in trade war. Trump pushed back Chinese spittoons, real or proverbial, and Xi Jinping, calling for clearing up air and reforestation of the land, banned the literal import of America's daily trash disguised as recyclable material which usually finds its way into American landfill instead of polluting a land that's far and away. As for Britain's Boris Johnson, his hair is still messy, and his job is still broken, having set his Brexited country adrift at ocean, far and away from all major geopolitical continental plates. And lastly, Gorbachev's 90th birthday just came and went. And President Biden praised him for his commitment to freedom. But as a man of great controversy, is Gorbachev considered a spittoon or a fruit basket? Maybe a spittoon for most Russians, a fruit basket for many Westerners, a nutty fruit cake and what's to be spitted into a spittoon for some Asians.